What's going on, guys? Echo here, and today we're going to talk about something that a lot of players struggle with in this game, and that is dealing with over-aggressive opponents, also known as mashers. Now, this is a topic I get a lot of questions about just due to the nature of this game. I mean, it's a very, very offensive game, and it's very heavily momentum-based, so it's not surprising that so many players have problems with this area of the game, but I'm here to tell you that it's not really as bad as you might think. There are actually a lot of good ways to deal with opponents who are not too worried about blocking and more focused on just offense. And I just want to be clear, when we say mashers, not really meaning it in like a derogatory sense. I mean, everybody mashes, top level players mash, some of the best players in the world mash. It's just something you have to do. But the good news is there are a lot of good ways to deal with mashing in this game, and we're going to go over those today. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So we're going to break down the 5 methods that I would recommend for dealing with overly aggressive opponents. And I say 5, but it's effectively one broad strategy broken down into different categories, and that is the strategy of just playing slow. Now, playing slow is something that's very simple to do on paper, but it's actually very hard to do in the middle of a match, and it does take a bit of practice to get used to. And there's also a lot to it, so let's go ahead and break down what I mean by playing slow step by step. So when you come to the conclusion that your opponent is very, very aggressive and they're not afraid to just hit buttons, that is when you need to employ the strategy of playing slow. And by playing slow, I basically mean using your tools in a clever way that lowers the amount of overall risk you're taking. And the main key to this strategy is patience. Like, you want to be as patient as you can, and you do not want to just rush in. One of the most difficult things about playing someone who's overly aggressive is sometimes it makes you feel like, oh, I have to be aggressive too. Like, he's swinging at me, I have to get in and stop him from swinging. And all that does is it turns it into both of you are now mashing, and then it just turns into a situation of who's hitting the button first. And that's not the situation you want, because when it comes down to that, basically you're now relying on luck and not skill. So we want to avoid those kinds of situations. A very simple but effective way of slowing the match down with just about any character is to utilize your ranged pokes, such as your ki blast. Simply by poking with ki first before going in, you cut off a lot of your opponent's options. This is what your ki blast is here for. If your opponent is, lunging at you and swinging auto combos, they are a huge target for this option. Auto combos are almost always going to lose the ki blast in just about any situation. And then when you start adding in your special moves with your ki blasts, that's when you start getting a situation to where you're taking very low risk and you're kind of forcing your opponent into a spot to where they're going to have to think more carefully about what they're going to do, or they're just going to take damage. The biggest focus of playing slow is to safely go from the neutral point to either a pressure point or the knockdown. Once you actually get on someone's block, the amount of guessing you're doing goes way down, and that's even more so when you knock them down. When you knock them down, you're basically guaranteed a free turn, and when you're on their block, that is your turn. So that's the situation you want, but you want to try to get that situation in the safest way possible. So whatever your character's best range tools are, be sure to start your offense by poking with those rather than just running in and going for auto combo or super dashing in. That's another one. You want to try to avoid super dashing as much as you can on highly offensive opponents, because when you super dash, that's when things start to really get random. That's when you can randomly get picked up by assists. That's when you're most likely to get hit by stray auto combos. That's when, you're likely to get crossed up. all sorts of bad things happen when you super dash. Super dashing on a highly active opponent is basically rolling the dice. There are good times to super dash, and we'll go over that later, but first you want to rely on your ranged attacks. That way you can potentially set them up for pressure or even just get a combo outright. So now that we understand the mindset of how to play slow, let's go ahead and break down how to actually apply that with method number 2, and that is to layer your assist calls. Now, layering assist is something I talk about a lot, but just in case you've never heard of it, it is one of your best tools against highly aggressive opponents. So what is the difference between a layered assist and a regular assist call? So with a regular assist call, you're just calling the assist and hoping for the best. Maybe you're jumping back and calling it, maybe you're jumping forward and calling it. However, when you layer your assist, you call it in tandem with one of your ranged pokes. As we talked about earlier, you want to slow the match down with your ranged pokes. Well, this becomes even more effective when you layer your assists. For example, if I call the Kefla assist with my Ki Blast now, as long as my Ki Blast is blocked, I now get my turn. I now get a guaranteed turn, and I have a second assist behind that ready for me to go for a mix-up. So now I'm almost guaranteeing that they have to take some kind of pressure. And we already established that Ki Blasts are a low-risk way of getting in, and they're a good way of stopping auto combo and stopping, normal advances. So by combining these two, you now create a very dangerous situation and you cut off a lot of space from your opponent. And the entire idea of layering is that whether or not you hit the assist or not, you're still in a good situation. Because if I do my Ki Blast with the assist, as you saw, if it's blocked, I get to run in and get a turn, but if it's hit, I also get a combo. So either way, you end up with a good situation, and that is what proper assist layering is all about. And of course, it's not just limited to Ki Blast either. Let's say that you have a short range assist, like a short range assist that comes out quickly, like like base Goku's assist here. Another good way of layering it is to use one of your lariats or any of your long-ranged attacks, anything that moves you in quickly, use that in tandem with that assist, and once again, whether it connects or it's blocked, you are getting a guaranteed turn. And this happens even on whiff. This is a very popular thing in the game nowadays. I've covered this before, but you use a move that lunges in and then call a short range assist. And what this does is it cuts off a lot of space on the screen. Like, let's say your opponent is jumping and now they're taking pressure. So as you can see, layering is one of the most effective ways of getting in safely, and it should be your go-to focus when you're playing the neutral game. And yes, even the ultimate classic Super Dash Call Assist is an example of assist layering too. So if you do feel the need to Super Dash, or you do see an opening to Super Dash, at least make sure that you layer it with an assist afterwards. Assist layering is so important, in fact, that I would honestly recommend, if you spend both your assists and you don't get anything, switch to defensive mode. Do a little bit of zoning, play a little bit of keep away until you get your assists back, and then there you go. Use those tools once again, try to get that opening, and rinse, repeat. And now that we understand the importance of layering our assists, let's move on to point number 3, and that is utilizing movement. Now, there are a lot of different ways to move in this game, and movement is a very broad topic, but we're going to talk about movement options that you should be utilizing that are definitely going to help you in matches with aggressive opponents. The number one being, and this is for not just aggressive opponents, but all opponents, that being the float. In case you didn't know, in order to float in this game, you hit down, up, and then you simply hold up. What that does is that not only delays how long it takes for you to hit the ground, but it gives you air movement afterwards. When you do a regular jump, you have no control over how you move after it. As you can see, I'm pressing left and right, and I'm not going anywhere. But when I super jump, I can float forward, I can float backwards, I can go somewhere in between. You have a lot of options when you super jump, not to mention how high you go off the screen, and you still get a second jump. Let's look at a quick example of why super jump is so much better than a normal jump. So as you saw, I reacted to the Vegito assist call by jumping backwards, but my jump is not high enough or fast enough to get out of the way, so I'm left to take some pressure from the advancing Gogeta. However, what happens if I super jump instead? As you can see, by simply just floating, even if you were to just float backwards, look at how much space I have created from a full screen dash into a complete auto combo. He's literally nowhere near me. Floating is literally one of the best tools in the game, and it's something you should be utilizing constantly. When you do a normal jump, you're kind of locking yourself into a situation like your opponent knows exactly where you're going to land and win. However, when you super jump, there are just so many ways that you can change your momentum that your opponent just has no idea where you're going to land, and it becomes a guess for them. It becomes a lot harder, not to mention it becomes hard for them to nail you with any of their assists. And the best part of it is when you add this to what we just learned about layering assists, you can see that the options get even stronger. So as you can see, floating has a ton of benefits, especially when you start to combine it with assist layering. Also keep in mind that they buffed floating by allowing you to hold the S button. If you hold the S button, it will make all of your jumps super jump. So this makes it even easier to float across the entire screen. It's actually kind of crazy, and I would actually highly recommend getting used to this. The best time to utilize this is at round start. When the match starts, you can literally hold S during the intros or during the, get ready, and it will allow you to super jump immediately without having to hit down up. So this is a great way to round start, especially if you know that your opponent is very aggressive. Now, of course, floating isn't the only great option. There's also another one I would highly recommend, and that is the momentum jump. The momentum jump is simply the act of jumping after dashing. When you jump after you dash, it carries your momentum across the screen and basically throws you at your opponent, similar to a super dash. In instances where you feel like you want a super dash, I would recommend using a momentum jump instead, because a momentum jump is a very safe way of approaching. Rather than, super dashing and leaving it up to fate, or simply running up to your opponent and swinging, momentum jump is great because you can travel across the screen while blocking. If you're fighting an opponent who is super dashing a lot, this is a great way to approach them, since you can block all the way across the screen and you don't have to worry about are they going to super dash or not. This can also be a great way to punish beams and other unsafe moves as well. And the best part of it is a momentum jump is very low committal, and if you don't like what you see when you get there, you can still backdash. Movement is definitely one of the greatest and strongest key factors in this game, and when you combine it with smart decisions and layering your assists, then it's going to be very, very hard for an opponent to just mash, because most likely you're not going to be in range for their mashing to actually hit you. So with a good grasp on movement, let's move on to number 4, and that is avoiding scrambles and RPS. So this one is both easy and difficult. There's always going to be weird little scrambly moments in this game. Maybe they dropped their combo. Maybe you dropped your combo. There's a lot of weird little scrambly moments in this game where it kind of comes down to first come, first serve, right? And those are the kind of situations that we really want to avoid. When you find yourself in those situations, my greatest advice, and this is what I do if you watch any of my match videos, whenever you get to a point where you're not really sure what's happening, or you feel like you're in the midst of a scramble, try to go back to steps 2 and 3, mainly step 3. If you end up in a situation where things seem weird, float out of there. Get out of that situation until things make sense again. Once you get back to this point, back to the neutral point where neither you or the opponent have the advantage, then go back to your game plan. You don't have to, take the bait. And I know it's really hard to not give into that urge. Like sometimes if it seems like the opponent's unsafe, you just want to swing at them, you want to go for that hit, maybe you want to super dash. But if you can kill that urge, all that's going to do is that's going to just make your playstyle safer, and it's going to limit the amount of risks you take. Because literally there's nothing riskier than swinging in a scramble. I'm not saying don't ever do it, but it's something that you should consider to do less often, especially like if you're ahead in health. At that point, there's no reason to take a big risk. If you find yourself in a scramble situation, use your movement options to get out of there. You know, use your air backdash, use your float, you know, use your assist layers, use whatever you can to try to get back to the point where the match is no longer a scramble and it's back in your favor, or at least get it back to neutral. Because when you're in the neutral, that's when you can go back to slowing the match down, making good decisions, and not getting drawn into your opponent's pace. And that's going to segue us into the last and pretty much the most important tip, and that is do not be afraid to block. Just blocking even a little bit can turn the tide so much, because when someone says block, they don't mean sit there and be a brick wall like Goichi, you know? That just means be willing to take some offense. Don't feel like it always has to be your turn. It's gonna be the opponent's turn sometimes, and that's okay, because even when they're on your block, there are not a lot of ways for your opponent to open you up quickly. So even if you block a few things, you have Vanish Guard Cancel, you have regular Guard Cancel, you have Sparking Blast. You have a lot of different ways to defend yourself even when blocking. So blocking is something that you need to get comfortable with. You don't want to panic and you don't want to try to avoid it, because that's going to lead you into an RPS situation. Yeah, it can be hard to block 6M online and stuff like that, and it can be hard to break throws, but generally most players' block strings are not going to be so scary that you have to mash. Usually if you just wait long enough, you can either sneak your way out with a guard cancel vanish, a regular guard cancel, or you can just, a lot of times, you can wait for them to expend their resources and take your turn back. Because no matter what, at the end of the day, almost every character is going to give up their turn at some point. So as long as you either wait for that or use your defensive options, there's really nothing to worry about. And with that, we have covered my 5 main tips for dealing with highly aggressive play in DBFZ. Everything we've talked about today is fairly simple, but extremely effective when you put it all together. The main takeaway from this, from the idea of playing slow, is that if you're playing in a way that is low risk and low committal, it's going to be very hard for an opponent who is not adapting to actually beat you. By layering your assists, you basically force your opponent to play in a way to where they have to avoid your pokes and your assists at the same time, which is difficult. By emphasizing movement and spacing, you're forcing your opponent to have to move and space as well with you, which is very hard to do in this game. And by avoiding scrambles, you're a lot less likely to end up in a bad situation or take pressure, because you're not going to be rolling the dice as much. Putting all these things together, you're basically forcing your opponent to play smart, and at the end of the day, either they're going to play smart or they're going to keep mashing, and these techniques are going to knock them off the server. And with that, we have reached the end of this video. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this or you feel like you learned something. You can check out my guide section for more guides similar to this and other guides meant to help you do better in DBFZ. You can also check out my playlist of my sets, where you can see me playing with my very low risk style that I talk about here. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next guide, set of matches, or match reviews, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.